All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for everyone who has joined us this afternoon as we talk about the product manager's influence map. Getting ready to get started here. So thanks everyone who has dialed in and joined us. So welcome everyone. Really excited this afternoon to take some time to share a bit about how product managers can exercise stronger influence throughout the organization. For those who have paid attention to some of what we've been doing at Pendo recently, you may have seen a few weeks back when we initially launched this new ebook called the Product Manager's Influence Map. We've seen a lot of positive response since we did roll that out a few weeks ago, and we wanted to take some time today to, again, just kind of share a little bit about the influence map, what it is, why it is, and talk, sort of at a broad level, how product managers can really do a better job of leading by influence throughout the organization. So just a couple notes before we get started. We do definitely want to make this as interactive a session as possible. So there are a number of polls that we're going to ask throughout the session. Appreciate your feedback as well. And then, of course, we are going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the session. So if at any point as you're listening to this, you have any questions, any comments you want to make, there's a little Q&A widget there at the bottom of the window for Zoom. Just go ahead and click that and enter your question, and we will have plenty of time at the end to address as many of those as possible. So who is presenting today? Well, I'm Michael Peach, for those who haven't met me. Do a lot of product marketing work here at Pendo, and I really led this project of creating the product manager's influence map here. And I am very, very excited to be joined by Cliff Gilley. Cliff was the primary author of the product manager's influence map. For those who don't know him, you might know him as his alter ego, the Clever PM. Cliff writes extensively on his blog about all things product management as well as other places. And from our experience working with him, he was absolutely the perfect person to help us build this out, given both his great domain expertise as well as the fact that he's just a really good writer. So if folks have not had a chance to check out the Clever PM blog, it's not part of your regular reading, we highly recommend it. Great source of intro. Welcome, Cliff. Anything else you want to say by means of introduction to folks?
Thanks, Mike. No, I mean, I'm honored to have gotten the introduction that I got. So just a quick bit of background on me. Aside from being the Clever PM on my blog, I've been in product management for about over 15 years now, which is a long time. And I've worked in quite a variety of different companies, different sizes, different markets, different approaches to creating solutions for customers. And I think one thing that I really tried to focus this work on with Pendo, and I'm thankful for the opportunity, is kind of collating all of that experience into concepts around leading through influence. Because as anyone who is a product manager knows, it's kind of the number one most important thing that we do on a daily basis. We don't get to tell people what to do. We have to convince them of the right things to do. And hopefully this work and other stuff that Pendo's got in queue will help out product managers to achieve those goals.
Great. Thanks, Cliff. So the influence map, what is it and why did we build it? And I think Cliff's intro was probably a really great preamble to that. Obviously at Pendo, we spend a lot of time working with product managers. Those are obviously the bulk of our customers, and our users at Pendo are in the product management role. And our goal as a company is really to help digital product teams deliver products that their customers will love. And, of course, a significant part of that is through some of the software that we provide. But it's also about helping product managers become more proficient at their jobs. This is something that we feel very strongly about. It influences a lot of the content that we create. And in fact, we've built really a whole separate portal and content site for folks who haven't visited it called Product Craft that does just that. Really content that's focused on the art and science of great product management. As Cliff said, more than any other role, product managers really lead through influence. I mean, a new product manager doesn't come into a team and say, here are your 25 direct reports that are going to do all the work you need to get done, command and control them to victory. Instead, a product manager is dropped in an organization often with no direct reports and tasked with the challenge of produce this product and get it to market as soon as possible. And the only way to be successful at that is really to drive deep influence across the organization. The other thing that we've seen is although this is a really, really important part of the day-to-day job of a product manager, it's also something that's not really taught. It's not part of even the meager curriculums that are out there around product management training. So we wanted to try and provide kind of a primer on this topic as a way for product managers to understand sort of who's out there, who are the stakeholders out there in the organization that are probably really important to the things that they're trying to do, as well as provide some pretty straightforward operational guidance to help them increase alignment and influence with those departments. So to do that, hence the idea of a map, we tried to figure out, what's the best way to plot some of these different roles and departments to help understand what should be a priority relationship to focus on from the product management radar. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cliff to kind of talk through the framework and the model that we put together for this.
Thanks, Mike. So the approach that we kind of took was looking at essentially two different axes of what influence really means. So one axis on the bottom there is functional distance. And what we mean by that is essentially how closely aligned are the groups within the actual organization. So how often do they interact? How closely do they work and support each other in trying to achieve their goals? And on the left side, you've got workflow dependency. That axis is mostly focused on how, not necessarily how closely they are physically or organizationally, but how closely does the work that they do depend or influence the work of a product manager. So, using the kind of 4-quadrant model on that, with low functional distance and low workflow dependency on the bottom left, and high on the top right, we looked into kind of separating those out and finding what themes we could create around those. So we've essentially created 4 categories. Critical supporters, these are the people that are both functionally close to product manager and upon whom the product manager relies, or upon groups that rely on product management for success. Then we get into the potential disruptors who are close to the product manager, but the priorities and motivations can really significantly, they're not functionally close to the product manager. But their priorities and motivations can really affect what we try to do on a daily basis. On the bottom left, we've got low functional distance and low workflow dependency. We consider these to be accelerators. These are roles that are neither close nor really dependent, or are we dependent upon them. But if we achieve strong alignment with them, we can really accelerate our product capabilities based on their input, feedback, and collaboration. And then on the far right, we've got the far bottom right, we've got the outliers. These are roles that aren't closely related to the product manager, or that are not, let me try that again. They're not functionally close, nor do they create strong dependencies. These are teams that have a little bit of impact on our success, here and there, occasionally, but their direct day-to-day work isn't going to impact us. In fact, a lot of what they do doesn't affect us at all, except in the very, very periphery of what we do. So those are the four quadrants, and within those quadrants, we chose really 2 examples for each one. And these examples aren't meant to be the only ones, nor are they necessarily the correct ones for your organization. So when looking at this model, I really do encourage people to think closely about whether it matches their exact organization. We took data from our own experience and from others to piece these together and put the most common departments or sub-organizations into these categories, but it may differ depending on where you are in your organization. So we have marketing and engineering as critical supporters. Those are teams that product managers work with probably every single day in order to achieve their goals. We have tech support and customer success as accelerators. They're people that we do work with on occasion, but they aren't really dependent upon us necessarily for what their goals and objectives are. In the potential disruptors, we have sales and finance. Some product managers in smaller companies might work more closely with sales teams. Other product managers in larger companies might work less closely with them. But the point there is that both of those companies can have severe and disruptive impacts on us if we don't manage our relationships closely with them. And then for outliers, really we selected HR and operations. We do interact with them on a constant basis here and there. HR is involved in hiring, operations is involved with the day-to-day operations of the business, but we don't tend to have really strong needs from them, nor do they have needs from us. But we do want to maintain relationships with them so that if something does come up, we have people that we can rely on and who are friendly to us that we can respond with. So that brings us to our first category, the critical supporters. So as I noted, these are the groups that are both closely aligned with the product manager in both form and function. So these are teams that not only do we work closely with, but that we're usually very closely aligned with in as far as goals, objectives, KPIs, all of those sorts of measures go. They also depend directly on us. So it's kind of a bit of a bidirectional relationship. Marketing really can't succeed without work that the product team is doing. Engineering can't succeed without work the product team is doing. And product certainly can't succeed without the work that marketing and engineering both do. So to focus in on marketing as a critical supporter, what we like to think about is just how key or how impossible their job would be without us and our job could be without them. They may be focused on press releases, sales collateral, print advertising, online advertising, all of these sorts of things. It's really critical that they have our support and feedback and input into what they're trying to do to achieve their goals. But in addition, they're also one of our key sources of information for just determining what kind of product improvements we're doing, what our prioritization might be. The inbound side of product marketing is almost as important, if not more important, to product managers as the outbound side of product marketing. And when it comes to engineering, let me step back and talk a little bit about ways that we can create alignment with marketing teams. So, I've mentioned that it's really important that we do so, but what can we actually do? So there's a few common things that I've seen be very successful. One is, and this quite frankly applies to almost every team that we're talking about today, is to really hold regular update meetings that involve as many different groups as possible, but in particular marketing. If your marketing team is off doing their own work and you're not involved with them on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis, you're really not leveraging that relationship to the level that you should as a good product manager. It's really key to have those checkpoints so that one, you can get feedback from them, but also you can kind of keep an eye on what the marketing message is. What is the brand positioning? Is the readiness content that they're creating actually reflective of the product work that's been done? The more separation you have between product management and marketing, the more likely it is that things are going to be positioned out there that may not match what the product can actually do. Another thing that we can really do that is, I think, essential is providing detailed documentation to marketing teams in their own language. So, feature and benefit overviews, those sorts of things are great when they're positioned in a way that marketing can understand. If they simply repeat the user stories that the engineering team executed, that's not necessarily going to be of high value, nor is it going to build your influence. As product managers, we really need to keep in mind that we're as much in charge of translating as we are in communicating. So when we do those kinds of detailed documentation, the feature benefit analysis, the whatever it is that marketing needs from us to succeed, we need to make sure it's positioned in a way that marketing can understand and use. I think there's a couple other things, and personally, I think that a product manager should really be actively participating in what marketing is doing. So not just giving them paper and or emails or Word documents and then stepping away, but actually working with them to establish yourself as a subject matter expert. That could include doing webinars like this one. It could include writing content for blogs or for social media. And personally, I think, or I've found that actually volunteering for events, even including setup and tear down, can really, really build a strong relationship between you and the marketing team. That's actually one thing that a lot of people don't like to do. But as a product manager, if we volunteer to do that, one, it gets us to the events, which can be a struggle in some organizations. But two, it shows that we're not just there as an outside observer, right? We're there to support our team members in everything that it is that they do, even if it's hard work, even if it's setting up the booth or taking it down, even if it's doing booth duty and just standing there handing out swag for 3 hours or so. All of those things have immense benefit to us as product managers, building that relationship with the marketing team. So I strongly urge people to kind of volunteer for those sorts of events, even if they're local events, even if they're small in-office events. Whatever it is the marketing team is doing, you should kind of be there on the periphery or involved as much as you possibly can. The other group that we identified as critical supporters should not be a surprise to anyone at all. The engineering team is by far perhaps the single most important critical supporter of product management that we have, right? They bring us the technical expertise that complements our market knowledge, that actually builds the products that we deliver. It's essential that we have a strong relationship with engineering. When we swoop in and drop requirements on them and then swoop out and go off to do things that are completely unrelated, we're really not setting anyone up for success. Engineering teams should be the problem solvers, the sources of new approaches. There's really no other team that defines the success or failure of product managers other than ourselves. We really need to be very closely aligned with them. We need to understand what their needs from us are, and we need to help them to understand what we need from them. That's going to be different in different organizations. You're going to need to give more information or less information. But there's a few things that we can do that are very specific to kind of drive that relationship. One, I absolutely believe that we need to celebrate milestones and successes together as a group. Even if it's a great sprint, bring in pizza on Friday, for the retro meeting. Do something that shows appreciation for the engineers and the hard work that they do. It's so often an afterthought, and it really shouldn't be. We need to work to explain and evangelize the goals of the work that we're trying to do, both internally and externally. There are product managers out there, and I've fallen into this trap that basically are doing what they need to do. They deliver the requirements, and they really don't spend the time explaining the why to the engineers. And quite frankly, every time I do that, I wind up being disappointed with the outcomes. So as a product manager, we need to make sure people understand the goals that we're driving to, not just the work that we're asking them to do. The last thing that I think is super important to create alignment with your engineering teams is to participate in the agile ceremonies, not necessarily as a pig, as a talker, as an active participant, but to be there as a trusted advisor to them, to help them, be better about creating better products, to raise questions during retrospectives that they may not be comfortable raising themselves, to encourage people to work a stand-up the way it's supposed to work, as just a quick overview to set the agenda for the day. We don't have to be super actively involved, but we do have to be there, and we do have to show that we care. Ultimately, if we're not present in these ceremonies, then we're not present in the engineering team's mind, and that will severely undercut our ability to influence them going forward.
All right, so that takes us to will be our first poll of the day, which is asking how strongly do you think you're aligned with your marketing team? So take a moment and fill that out. Okay. And let's see. So it looks like pretty much across the board, 63% of you said somewhat aligned, with a little bit more towards strongly aligned, and not too many people who say they're not aligned at all, which is pretty good. Good to see that everyone is taking Cliff's advice to heart already. All right, so moving on, we're going to talk now about accelerators. So as Cliff mentioned, these are the ones who are not as functionally close to PMs, but whose work can have a lot of impact both ways. So accelerators are definitely independent from product managers in the jobs that they do, but because of where they sit and because of the potential for them to work together very well, there's a lot of lift that can actually come from really strong alignment with both of these departments. And they can provide a lot of feedback, a lot of times potentially very valuable feedback into the product organization. And they usually take content or materials or training and info from the product team and push that back into their day-to-day jobs. And as we looked at this particular group, it really came to the front that tech support and customer success were really two great examples of accelerators. So tech support, obviously, if you think about what tech support does in day-to-day, it is pretty separate from the movements and the work that the product team is doing. They're focused on understanding, addressing, and ultimately responding to customer issues and customer challenges as they come in. Now, they are, of course, very, very important to the organization, but they also have the ability to be very, very important to the product team when there's good engagement, right? So tech support is often really one of the great avenues for feedback, right? Tech support's on the front line, they're talking to customers, and most importantly, they're talking to customers when those customers are experiencing issues. So if there are potential problems or issues or usability concerns with the software, a lot of times those will surface in the form of support tickets that get to tech support. So, at a high level, what is tech support doing? Well, they're focusing, as I said, on responding to customer issues. Their goal is really both to solve problems, reduce friction for customers, and ultimately maintain or increase customer satisfaction. They will often escalate common patterns or issues or potentially high priority customer problems for remediation from the product and engineering team. So from the product management, what are they looking for? Well, obviously they're looking for information and content about updated releases and training on new features in the product. Just knowing that tech support is always going to get questions when new features are launched. Even the best documented feature in the world is probably going to result in a few support tickets that the support team needs to be able to answer quickly. They need visibility into known product issues, right? If there's a problem or a common challenge that's known, really helpful if tech support knows about it so they can guide customers through that issue pretty quickly. And then they also need visibility from the timeline into sort of bug triage as well as bug reports and timeline. So being able to understand when something's going to be fixed, what's being prioritized, and a timeline for when it's going to be back out is really, really important for the tech support team, especially as they're trying to be able to sort of manage issues in a way that maximize customer satisfaction. So obviously there can be breakdowns in this relationship. So if support is having too small a focus on a particular customer issue, especially if it's ultimately kind of an edge case, they can end up pushing for things and responses from the product team that's really not in alignment with the overall strategy. Support sometimes doesn't have enough of a voice at the table when prioritization or product strategy decisions are being made. As a result, that sometimes means that things that are important to particular customers don't get surfaced and don't get prioritized. So how, as a product manager, do you improve alignment with tech support? Well, one of the easiest things to do is to spend some time with them. Go sit at the support desk for a few hours, work a shift, answer tickets. It develops rapport with tech support, but it also gives you frontline visibility in some of the common issues that are coming in from customers. Make sure that the support team knows that their input is both accepted and valued as part of the product development and prioritization process. They know how many customers have asked for a particular feature. You should make sure that they know that that information is being taken, considered, and used. And then, of course, make sure you're clearly communicating timelines for any important changes or fixes. Customers are often struggling and waiting for particular bug fixes, and the more information that support can provide to them, the more comfortable and happy they're ultimately going to be with the interaction. The other key role that we added and that we featured in the accelerator section of the ebook is customer success. Customer success is maybe a little bit of a newer role in the software industry that's come about as more and more software has moved to a subscription delivered model. But those sort of core capabilities have always existed in the organization under different names. Sometimes they were called implementation teams, sometimes they were professional services teams, sometimes they were called account management. And really what customer success is just that set of capabilities, or a subset of those roles brought into a single customer-facing role who's really primarily focused on driving retention in a subscription business. So they're focused on, each customer success manager will have usually an array of customers that they own, and they are focused on really driving sort of success for that customer. As a result, they don't tend to have a lot of day-to-day functional dependency on the product team. But again, when there's alignment between customer success and product, there's really an opportunity to up-level and grow. And for example, just as a note, right, customer success and product are both really, really focused on adoption. Both of them have a really tight shared goal on making sure that features that get delivered are both made aware to customers, so that customers know about them, and that customers are using them. Both of these roles really want to make sure that customers are getting full use out of the product. So, in core responsibilities, they're focused on engaging customers, making sure that they're successful, or another way to think about it, making sure that they're getting value from the product. Identifying and engaging with those customers who aren't doing great adoption or who may be at risk for other reasons, and intervening to prevent churn. They often have growth revenue targets through upsell or cross-sell into customers. And of course, they tend to focus very heavily on that initial phase of the customer journey, helping them with implementation and onboarding. So their needs from product management are somewhat similar to tech support, but also a little bit different. Obviously, much like tech support, they need information about what's being shipped, what it does, why it's valuable. All of that information is important because customer success is often that frontline channel to customers. So driving awareness and getting feedback from customers on new releases is really, really important, and only something that can be done if PM is communicating things well. Customer success also wants access to the product team. Most notably, they'll probably want access to the product team for their customers. So having them be available for important customers or in the midst of heavy renewals to be able to communicate and share roadmap priorities, features that are being delivered, or other content that could help improve the customer relationship. Now, of course, there are also ways that this relationship can break down. Customer success might not have clear visibility into what's prioritized and may end up promising things to customers that won't be delivered for a long time, or might even never be delivered. Sometimes, like success, they can be too focused on a particular customer or a particular use case, and maybe not being able to step back and look at the overall product strategy and understanding whether something that might help that single individual customer is necessarily the best thing for the product overall. They can also sometimes take shortcuts or maybe use the word hacks to try and achieve an outcome for a customer that, while it might work in the short term, might ultimately be some sort of long-term detrimental issue. This especially can be the case when you've got technical teams aligned to customer success that are working on implementation. Sometimes they will overly customize something for a customer that'll ultimately break when a product change happens or something else happens to a feature. So how to improve alignment with customer success? Well, the first thing to do is make yourself available. The product team is often the role in the organization that customers want to speak to the most. Product has a clear insight into the why behind what they're building. They have clear insight into what's coming down the pipe and when. And they can really help customers understand the value of some of the things that are being built. So a great relationship means making yourself available to customer success teams and using, frankly, their regular meetings and even some of their on-site visits as a way to get feedback from customers. Much like with success, making sure that customer issues that surface through the success team are visible and and that feed into product prioritization. And then lastly, just making sure to engage CS teams. If you're building a new feature that is based on the requests of 3 or 4 really important customers, the customer success manager for those customers is probably a really good person to share prototypes or early versions of the feature with to get feedback. They know the customer, they know the use case, and can be a really valuable resource in letting you know if you're on the right track in terms of a solution. So with that, we will jump to our second poll. So for folks on the line, let us know, how often do you work with customer success team at your organization? All right, I think we're good there. Thanks, everyone. So interesting. This group here is very much aligned with their customer success team, even more so than with their marketing teams. So the accelerators get a little more love than the critical supporters. But really good to see this tight alignment here between CS and product in the poll. Cliff, any thoughts about why we're seeing such tight alignment for this group with CS?
My guess is, I would say it's probably that customer success has become such an increasing trend to actually be a focus. And a good product manager probably should be customer focused, obviously, but should probably be leveraging the customer success team for insight and input, as they're a really great, closely within the organization source of data from outside the organization.
Great. All right. So moving on, let's talk about those disruptors.
All right, potential disruptors. So these guys are roles that don't depend significantly on the work of a product management team, at least not directly, but their decisions can really and really significantly impact the landscape through which we navigate in the organization. So there's really 2 primary characteristics that help us identify a team as a potential disruptor. One is the amount of influence they have in an organization, which both of these teams, finance and sales, kind of have a huge amount of influence within the organization, depending on where you're at in your growth phases. But also it's the isolation in the reporting structure from the product team itself. So marketing and product tend to be a lot closer aligned in an organization chart than product management and sales. And obviously finance is usually completely separate from your product team as far as the organizational structure itself. So these are teams who actually place limits on what we want to do, sometimes without really understanding why it needs to be done. So they're teams that can really go rogue on us if we're not paying attention to what they're doing, and they can promise customers features that don't exist yet. They can suddenly tighten the purse strings on us that affect our capability to deliver. it's really super important that we focus on this. I think we call it the hero work in the ebook. There's not a lot of immediate return on investment for both of these teams. Sales is out there selling the product, they're pushing the product, they're pushing the messaging. They will usually come to you when there's a problem, but if there's not a problem, you won't hear much from them at all. And finance, on the other hand, rarely interacts directly with product management, but their decisions can have just immense effects on what we're trying to do. So the rewards in building those relationships are really more in risk mitigation than they are in any kind of proactive solution that we're trying to achieve. We chose finance as a very interesting example of a potential disruptor that I think a lot of product managers don't really think deeply about. But when costs start to exceed thresholds or revenue growth slows or declines, it is the product, or it is the finance team who knows first. And it's the finance team who starts to make decisions about what gets cut and what cuts need to happen, if cuts need to happen, what areas of investment need to be deprioritized or reprioritized, or even to some degree, what are our financial goals for the quarters. Finance has influence and authority over all of those things, and if we just sit there and let them sit in their shadows in the back office, we really run a huge risk of being the ones that lose out when costs start to be cut. So we really want to invest in that relationship, even though it's not a direct relationship, even though it's not necessarily going to pay off immediately. We want to invest as a risk mitigation factor. And we can really do that by kind of putting ourselves in the role of the finance team. What is it that they need from a product team? What builds that trust and respect so that as things start to slide, we become one of the first people who know, or we get a heads up before decisions are made? And I think there's a few things that we can do that some product managers may not really focus on. One, and probably the most important one, if we think about what finance cares about, is we need to quantify the ROIs of our projects and our features and our products and our work and whatever we're responsible for as clearly as possible whenever we can. We need to make it clear to the company, clear to the business, and clear to the finance team that if they invest $100,000 in this project, we anticipate pulling $2 million over the next few years. Those don't have to be hard estimates. They don't have to be, detailed spreadsheet analysis, but we have to have some idea, and they have to understand just what it means if they need to cut a project. What does that actually mean? What impact does that have to the planned bottom line going forward? We need to be super clear and upfront about risks, uncertainties, and assumptions that we're making as product managers. This is something that in some organizations is not highly valued, but it absolutely should be. I've worked in several organizations where everything was green until it was red. And that's not a functional product management team at that point, because you should be able to assess risk. You should be able to communicate risk as long as you're mitigating it in some way. But if we're clear and upfront about those things, then we stand to lose a lot less, and the finance team will understand a lot more about the goals that we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve that. The last thing, and this is something that some teams are good at and some teams aren't, is to share the product KPIs and OKRs with the finance team, right? So that they can understand what it is that you as an organization are trying to drive for, so that they can clearly get what their impact on that would be. Influence is about building relationships. Influence is about building trust and respect. The more information we can give a finance team in their own language, the more likely they are to stop and think and say, oh, you know what, if we need to cut this particular line item, I already know that Cliff has a goal of achieving X, Y, and Z this year. We're going to impact that. We should probably talk to it. It doesn't mean that you're going to avoid the line item cuts. It doesn't mean that you're going to avoid the pain. But what it can mean is that you have a heads up ahead of time so that you can adjust your plan. You can adjust your resources. You can adjust your own objectives so that they reflect the reality that's going to hit you. So with finance, it's really about building that relationship so that when something goes wrong, you're capable of responding in a better and more comprehensive manner. Sales, on the other hand, is much more of a direct disruptor. And I think many product managers have experienced this particular area of disruption. Even though we may work closely with sales organizations, that's not that doesn't make them a critical supporter, right? It really puts them in the disruptor mode because they're still isolated. They're still siloed away from us. They still have completely different KPIs and OKRs than we do normally, right? They have variable comp plans. They have all of these things that are very specific to what they're trying to achieve that really don't reflect in any way the things that we're trying to do. We may have a broad goal that's the same, but the day-to-day motivations of a sales team are very, very different from the day-to-day motivations of a product team. So what we want to do with the sales team is we want to build rapport, we want to build respect, we want to build trust so that they don't wind up going out into the market and saying things that will close a deal but might not be entirely true, or making promises to customers that aren't actually on the product roadmap just to seal that deal. I love salespeople dearly. Don't get me wrong. They bring in the revenue for the company. They bring in the whales that we need to keep ourselves afloat sometimes. But we need to, as product managers, own some of that relationship to make sure that what they're saying, when they're saying it, how they're saying it, really really fits the reality of the product that we're delivering. The other thing, they will often escalate issues out of nowhere, similar to the customer's success teams. They will hear something from a customer during a renewal cycle, and that becomes the most important thing that absolutely 100% has to be solved right now. And if we build relationships with them, we can mitigate that. We can talk to them about what is this really? Is this really just one customer's need, or is this a repeating pattern that you're hearing? We want to try to balance that urgency that they present to us with the importance that maintaining an ongoing product development process is kind of an art into itself. So we need to help them understand what it means to disrupt us and why that hurts us. There's a few things that we can do that I hope most product managers are actually already doing to kind of build that rapport with sales and head those issues off before they become a problem. The first is really just work with them. Work with them on demos, on technical overviews, training, collateral, whatever it is they need. The closer the information that they get comes from a product manager or the product team, the more accurate it's going to be when it gets out to the customer, right? Don't hand that off to a technical writer group. Don't hand that off to some other area, right? Let's focus on helping them to be the best salespeople that they can be, and do what you need to do that. Maybe that includes taking up kind of a technical sales role. Maybe that includes actually being on sales calls with them. Really, really focus on trying to help them be better. Another thing that the sales teams often like to have is help with training and pitching, right? As a product manager, you can sit on the other side of a phone call and have the phone representatives that are on the sales team give you a call and try to pitch you the product, right? You are an expert on the product. You know what's good, what's bad, what works, what doesn't, from the customer perspective. So use that as an ability. And the last thing that I highly recommend, and this can be a struggle, this can be a big challenge, is show them that you can be a fly on the wall. Like, the number one fear that I hear from salespeople when a product manager wants to get involved is that they're going to sour the deal. They're going to say something wrong during the presentation. They're going to raise issues that might be difficult for the salesperson to overcome. Make it clear to them that when you want to be in a quarterly review, you're really just there to listen. You just want to hear what people are saying. You don't want to focus in on taking problems away or raising problems. You just want to hear what's actually being said. Once you can establish that, you become a number one resource for those kinds of calls. And it's really super important for product managers to try to help your sales team be better at what they do, so that they're likely to respect you and hopefully disrupt you less.
All right, well, let's get to our last poll. So hide your monitor from your sales team if you happen to be sitting next to them, and let us know, how often does the sales team disrupt you? All right, see how that turned out. All right, about middle across the road, sales team occasionally disrupts me. Well, that sounds about right. I'm constantly disrupted by the sales team, about 27%. So appreciate the honesty there. It's true. They can be a disruptor, and it's, as Cliff was saying, this is something that's really important to manage. So thanks everyone. Appreciate the candid feedback there. So we'll just talk briefly about this last group, the outliers, since they are, well, outliers, meaning they don't have a significant impact on the product team and frankly are not functionally particularly close. That doesn't mean that they're not important. It just means that they are not very tightly aligned to the product team. So a couple that we called out here are both human resources and operations. As a product manager, you probably don't have a lot of day-to-day interactions with the HR team, except when it comes to hiring a new team member, perhaps annual reviews or open enrollment for benefits. But there is, HR obviously plays a really, really important role. They don't have a significant impact, but as a product manager, HR is definitely your pipeline to effective new team members, as well as a resource for career development. So as a product manager, you can, much like Cliff talked about for marketing, make yourself available for recruiting events, especially if they are events where potential product management candidates would be. Make sure that people know and are aware of, that your HR team know and are aware of what's required for a good product management candidate. Make sure that you're providing really clear feedback on candidates that you interview so they can do a good job of making sure the pipeline of folks is available and ready for you. Operations, here we're talking about sort of business operations. So that can be anything from procurement to facilities to IT. These are people that sort of keep the lights on, keep stuff moving, keep our computers running and our internet connected. They're obviously incredibly important to the overall function of the business. They're often not necessarily noticed and recognized for it. And they function in terms of functional distance and overlap with product management, it's not very, very high. But again, this is an important team. So as a product management team, you have certain requirements from facilities and technology. You want to make sure that they're met. Some good ways to build rapport with these people is first, just get to know them. IT folks aren't faceless. Learn their names, chat with them, talk to them, get to know them a little bit better. People always respond better to folks they feel friendly towards, and there's always an opportunity to develop rapport. The other thing is just make sure you're clear with needs and requests. What IT equipment, what servers, what facilities does your team need to be successful? Does your operations team know that? Are you clear about what things are really important and urgent and what things aren't, right? A great way to grow that relationship is just to make sure that you're honest and open and recognize the fact that they have priorities and fires to put out, and when what you need is a fire and when it isn't. Again, that's a really great way to sort of bring your operations team on board and have them support you as well. So that's just a quick overview of human resources and operations. So last quick poll here as we get through to the fourth one. Just out of curiosity, how often do you engage with the HR team at your organization? Is it one-off or pretty regularly? Okay. And as we expected, if we look at the results here, pretty rarely. That's why these folks are outliers. Doesn't mean they're important, but it means if I'm coming into a new product management job on day one, driving alignment with HR is probably not top of my list. So that kind of covers the 4 areas of the quadrant of the map that we spelled out for the product manager's influence map. But it's probably important to understand that there is one category that we didn't talk about, sort of the elephant in the room, shall we say. And it's the ultimate leadership team, the C-level, specifically your CEO. Where do they fit into the model, and how as a product manager should you be thinking about influence with the most senior levels of your organization? And Cliff, maybe you want to talk about this a little bit before we head into Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, this was an interesting conversation that Mike and I had while we were working on the ebook. Actually, was where does the C-level suite really fit? And there, we were balancing between, well, obviously they're a critical supporter, but really they're very different from all of the other teams in the organizations because they sit above the product manager. It's obviously very important that we have their collaboration and their support, but they have the ability to direct us to do what they want to do, right? So they're very different from the other groups that we've talked about here, right? They've got greater responsibility, they've got greater authority, and they've got greater influence than anyone else in the company. So the challenges that a product manager might have in influencing a C-level executive are really very different from those that we run into with other teams in the organizations. It's not always difficult or scary, right? First of all, let's put that out there, right? We do want to be aligned with what the C-level wants to do. We do want to have good relationships with them, and they're normally really great people that are really easy to talk with. But it is always a high stakes game when we're trying to work through influence through the C-level suite. So that's why we kind of set them aside on the model. And it also brought up a conversation about the whole CEO of the product concept, which I could go off on for hours, as I told Mike, but he told me to keep this real short and sweet. And the fact is product managers are not CEOs of the product. This term kind of needs to die, in my opinion, because we don't get to make we don't get to make fiat decisions. We don't. We have to lobby for resources. We influence from the bottom up. None of these things sound at all like a CEO. CEOs can tell you what to do because they want it to happen. Period. Because they're the CEO. They can make things happen regardless of what the resources are currently allocated because they're the CEO and they have top-down authority that we don't as product managers. So it's really important to not position yourself as the CEO of the product, and to build a strong relationship with C-level executives. And this doesn't mean that you have to do everything that they say, because we want to fight some of that hippo, highest paid person's opinions with data. So when the C-level comes up with something that you're not 100% in love with, go out and find data to combat it. Find hard data, find quantitative data from your customers that gives you the support to be able to say, look, I've talked with people, I've talked with customers, I've talked with prospects. None of them are supporting this movement. It's a great idea, and we maybe want to put it on the backlog, but maybe it's not something we want to invest in right away. It's the traditional Jim Barksdale quote of, if we have data, let's use data, but if all we have are opinions, we'll use mine. That's the approach that most C-level executives take. So we need to fight with data. We can't fight with opinions.
All right. And with that, let's get into the Q&A. I know we had a few questions come throughout the session, so thanks everyone. If you have a question and haven't logged it in yet, just load that into the Q&A box. First question we have here says, is there any product management advice for a product manager who comes into an environment where tech support, marketing, or account management is simply not in a role at the company due to being in a startup mode? Should product management jump on those grenades? Well, that certainly is a grenade, and do the job. Cliff, what do you think about that?
Oh man, that's a tough one. So for me, it really depends on what your strengths are as a product manager. Being in a startup, that's a true startup. So I'm going to say this is like a 10 to 20 person company max. Yes, you probably should take on some of those responsibilities, but you should also make it very clear that there's a cost to doing that, right? As looking at the examples there, right? Marketing, that's not too bad, right? I can probably still do a lot of what I'm doing as a product manager and still do some marketing, still do some copywriting, still do some social media stuff. That's probably not too disruptive. Tech support, no way. There is no way I can be an effective product manager and also be doing first or second tier tech support. That is a highly disruptive job that is going to prevent me from being able to do my primary core job. And similarly, account management can be exceptionally difficult and time consuming. What I would do in that kind of situation is kind of look at where my core competencies are as a product manager, where the strengths can kind of help out the organization, but try to be very clear about what your role is, and it's not to do everything. So where it's complementary to what you're trying to do, sure, reach out, help out, do whatever you can. Where it's disruptive to what your core job is, push back and say, if we really want tech support, we should hire someone to come in and be a tech support representative. If we really want an account manager, we should hire someone to come in. Those jobs don't necessarily have to have a highly skilled person to do them. Maybe to do them the best you would want to, but you could bring someone in to do even potentially tech support and account management under a customer success umbrella. There's a bunch of ways to do it, but I'd try to separate out what product management really is from what the roles are that the company just doesn't have.
Got it. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thanks, Cliff. We got just a few more minutes here for some questions. Another good one here. How do you socialize and evangelize your product roadmap across the org? And I think there's some really good words in there, like this notion of evangelize, right? The roadmap, I think, is as much a planning tool as it is a communication tool. And it's something that can be really valuable as an instrument in driving alignment, both internally and externally. So for example, at Pendo, we have a rule. If any customer-facing employee wishes to share the roadmap, either with a prospect or a current customer, they don't just hand the document that actually has the roadmap. They don't ship it. They get a product manager on the phone with that customer to take them through it. Because there's always that layer of context and communication around it, and something that really helps, kind of facilitate an understanding and alignment of what the product strategy is. Cliff, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely critical. Product roadmaps mean different things to different people at different times, and it's usually the product manager that knows the story behind it. And I think, I hate to say it, but sometimes sales teams try to use the product roadmap as a crutch. They try to promise futures based on what the roadmap says rather than what the product has right now. And that kind of behavior can be really disruptive. And it can actually be cause potential legal issues if you're a public company by promising futures that may or may not exist. And as a product manager, you're the best person to kind of walk the customer through. This is how we created the roadmap. This is how we think about our roadmap. Anything outside of 9 months is really just a projection of possible future rather than a commitment to deliver. I think you can train your sales team to do that, but that's a lot of hard work. And if you don't have the right kind of salespeople involved, it's probably easier to just take 30 minutes every couple weeks to walk a prospect through it.
Good, great question. I think we got time here for one more question. Here's an interesting one. Let's ask this one question. What are how do you deal with conflicting or slightly different user or buyer personas between the marketing and the product team? That's a really interesting question. We didn't cover that in the book, but I could see that being a source of really massive misalignment. How would you deal with that one, Cliff?
So I actually, ironically, have encouraged that at my current company. And it's with a clear understanding that the marketing personas are not the product personas. And there's a particular reason for that. And that's because so the company I work with is a large B2B platform offering. Our buyers are not our users. So when the marketing team is creating their collateral and their positioning, they're actually not targeting the end user. They're targeting a completely different department in the organization. Our buyers are usually IT departments, and our users are basically anyone in the organization. So by making it very clear that the two are separate, I think we've actually achieved greater success because we're not trying to build something for a buyer. We're trying to build something for the end user. And marketing isn't marketing toward the end user who has no influence whatsoever on the buying decision. So I think it can be successful if they're separate and diverse or divergent, but it has to be really carefully thought through and very, very clearly understood. And we've been lucky to have a really strong design team kind of running interference between those two for us. So they have all of the personas, and they are constantly looking at them and comparing them and seeing what information can kind of slide between them. But the engineering team really only works with the user personas, and the marketing team mostly works primarily with the buyer personas.
Got it. Great answer. Well, thanks everyone. We are definitely at time now, and sorry that we didn't get a chance to get through all the questions, but hopefully this is helpful for you. Hopefully you enjoyed learning a little bit about this, and of course we strongly recommend, if it's interesting, head on over to pendo.io where you can get your hands on a copy of the Product Manager's Influence Map, which has a lot more detail than what we covered today, as well as some really helpful tips and tricks that you can use to increase alignment and lead through influence throughout your organization. So with that, I'll leave it to you. Have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, rest of your day, all of you, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.